We're live. I didn't see the numbers, Chad, but I guess it says we're live. Are we
I
live?
had a
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. Um, Going to kind of talk a little bit about our week and everything and how much fun. It was a pleasure being able to spend 8 days with my buddy Chad. That was pretty exciting.
got a bonus day.
Yeah, got a bonus day. That was one day more than normal, so we did get an extra day. Um, I'll have to say one thing. I really have to compliment IMCA and the Boone Speedway for getting that deal pulled off. I've never, in the 40 years that I've been doing this, I've never experienced such an event. 4 days of rain, and they trudged through it, and they got the show in yesterday afternoon. Those guys, I'll have to say, they did an awesome job, and I've never sat through 4 days of rain at a racetrack in my whole entire life, but I did get to do that. I really have to actually, my biggest shout out, because as I was watching it yesterday during the features, and those track workers hooking up car after car after car after car, it was stuck in the mud, all that good stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if anybody's complimented those guys, but what they went through is beyond imaginable. Those track workers at Boone are amazing. Those guys were down there in their boots wading through freaking mud that's 6 inches high, and it was totally amazing. But the other thing is I really have to compliment the racers because, the racers stuck it out. Some guys left. They had to be home. They couldn't race on Sunday because they had commitments and other things. So, it's totally understandable. But they still had a good group of cars that stuck it out, and I just have to compliment everybody. I mean, even in Vendor Row, I think we only had a couple people that actually uh, went a little early. So I was pretty excited about that. I thought that was, I didn't think much of it by the time day 3 of rain got here. I'd had my fill of rain, but they pulled it off, and it'll go down in history as something that we'll never forget ever happened. What's your thoughts, Chad?
Yeah, exactly. The whole event is, it's such a marquee event to be part of. They do such a great job, and then to be thrown a curveball like that of 4 days of rain was unbelievable. But thankfully, where we are, it ain't real bad. Out there on the manufacturer's row, we don't have to deal with the 6 inches of mud and all that. But man, them racers they're a bunch of diehards. They'll do whatever it takes. Hauling wood chips in and sand and gravel and tarps, and man, it's unbelievable what everybody went through last week to put on a one hell of a show there this weekend. And it's just cool to be a part of it and around such a great group of people, and get to hang out with you guys for the 8 days and see so many of our great customers from all over the country. And it's a one we usually see most of them just that one time, and
Right.
so it's a fun week for sure. But we missed out on a lot of the extra time with, I would say, some of the fans that generally come to Manufacturers Row because of the 4 days of rain. But
Right.
I mean, it is what it is. So, but it was a good week.
Well, and the COVID thing, I thought they did a very good job with, how that was. Granted, I'm never a fan of them locking that one gate because, of course, we're like up in the corner from nowhere when they do that. So, I can understand that causes a little extra stress from time to time, but and then that eliminated the fact of the fans being able to come in there, and I think that was their concern, as far as the COVID stuff goes. But like I said, I mean, I was very impressed how they everybody got through it. And finally, I think actually even Sunday, it was finally dry enough that we could actually ride around a little bit on the cart, and did get to see some of the people that we didn't get to see. And Bobby's comment was, he said, "Could you imagine working in that stuff?" Nope, I'd be one of them guys that bailed. I said, there's no way I would do what some of these guys did do. I mean, it was just amazing. So that's pretty cool. Uh, the week started off great. We started out on Saturday for the prelude. Of course, BHE's Rocky Cottle driving Tim Judd's machine won the sport mod part of the prelude. Racetrack was super dry slick, and of course the BHE cars really favor that dry slick stuff. That's always a lot better, and of course the crate motor likes the dry slick stuff a whole lot better. So that was pretty cool. And then Sunday was 92 degrees, the sun shining, everything's nice and dry, and people are kind of moving around and all the stuff. And then all of a sudden Monday came, and Monday was still a nice day. We got the late model deal, and Ricky Thornton ended up winning back-to-back the late model show. And then all of a sudden the heck came on Tuesday, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And they finally actually canceled Friday's events. And then, of course, that made Saturday a Friday and a Saturday. I think for some reason I couldn't really sleep, so I stayed up and watched that event, and I think it ended at 4 a.m. And so that was kind of an interesting situation, but it was all good. Very good. Compliments to everybody. Justin Chad wants to know, will you be coming out with a drop cup version of the new OD Spring Cup? That one might be tough.
Yeah, well, we're planning on converting all of the Spring Cups to an OD grab, starting with the easiest one, so the short cup, and then the tall cup, and then the drop cup. So our intentions are to do that, and we're actually looking at trying to get a little more articulation out of that drop cup so we can get some more misalignment. So, and this would be the perfect opportunity for us to redesign that and get us a little more misalignment with the screw jacks. So that is coming. I would say it's probably a month to 2 months down the road, but definitely all of our Spring Cups are going to be OD grab in the near future here. So
yeah, I definitely think that's a positive thing. I mean, I really like that new cup. I think it's very efficient. I can't totally say back to back, but I sure felt like it freed the car up just a little bit better. Took a little bit of spring bind out of the front end, so I'm all in favor of those. Yeah, we got to see Todd McFarlane and his dad. That was pretty amazing. Those guys came out and hung out. Appreciate you guys stopping and visiting with us and stuff. That was pretty cool. Definitely, like he said, very dedicated bunch of racers. I thought that was pretty good. Justin wants to know, with a heavier driver naturally creating more left side percentage, what are some of the things you would do to combat the car being tight through the center in an IMCA modified? Well, Justin, it kind of depends on what the tightness is. If the tightness is because it's not getting on the right front, sometimes people get confused. Tightness can be when you get back on the throttle. Sometimes tightness can be where the front end just doesn't want to keep up with the back end. So in my opinion, normally with a heavier driver, it's pretty common that the car doesn't necessarily always want to get over on that right front like it should. We've went to things such as even moving weight around. We run our weight up higher on the right side to compensate for the larger driver, and we'll actually run a little bit of extra weight more in front of the motor plate up on the nose bar, and that's been pretty successful. So I would say moving some weight around, getting the car so that it tries to get over on the right front. Make sure you've got some pretty decent bar angle. You're probably going to want to run a little bit more bar angle in the upper and the lower to force that car over on the right front, because most of the time if a car's tight with a larger driver, it's a tight situation because the right front's just not doing what it needs to do. And so that's kind of the biggest thing that you can do to help that, those type of things. The other thing that you can do too is you can run your left side ride heights a little higher. kind of put the car in static attitude. You know, lower your right front a little bit, raise the left rear a little bit, kind of get it so that it's more in attitude to get on the right front, and that's something that works pretty well. So we've been, what was this? What's this? Our 12th show now?
Way more than that. 20.
Oh, 20?
19, 20.
Well, you know, I am of age, so my memory's not like it used to be.
What's the statistician say? Has he got it figured out how many we're on?
I don't know.
So the highlight.
He says 18.
18, yeah. The Boone highlight for me was lining up and staging in the pace truck for the All-Star race with Steve.
Oh, sure.
Steve-O driving. That was pretty badass to be able to pace the All-Star race. And you know, usually we're in the infield and then we just join the field there, but we were lined up and staging where all the races are staged, and that was pretty neat for Steve-O to get to experience that. And that was a pretty cool highlight of the week.
Cool. He corrected me. You are right, Chad. It is number 20.
Number 20.
I really don't know why you were going to argue with Chad in the first place. I mean, seriously. If there's anybody that knows, best way to get drive in a USRA hobby stock, we get to run American racers. I'll tell you what, and this is not a sales pitch. This is an answer to your question. Shocks in the hobby stock deal is a pretty key factor. Man, I'll tell you what, having a great shock package is really, that's a real key, because you're so limited on what else you can do. You know, your tire's good. You know, and one of the things that people kind of get, you know, don't forget about more front stagger, helps the car turn, you know, so you don't have to get the car sideways. The problem with the hobby stocks, with the suspension and everything, if the cars get too sideways, it's pretty hard for them to come back. So you got to drive them a little bit straighter and drag race off. But like I said, you know, talk to your shock guy. If you need a shock guy, I got a number you can call. But we've had super good luck with with our experiences, and some of the hobby stock shocks have been pretty good. We've got an Integra package that's pretty dynamic. Chad, you talked a lot about zero indexing. I have a Rage IMCAA mod and have been told not to zero index because it will make the car too tight. What's your experience been with this?
Well, I would say that, you know, I would run it all the time, and it depends on what you do and what you're trying to achieve with the zero index. You know, just moving the bars and being in the standard locations on the cages doesn't generally change the car that much, I don't feel. But every car is different. Every balance is different. Every driver is different. So it definitely changes the way you drive in the corner. The zero index thing is just simply to not cam the cage over and allow you to run more drive angle. So naturally, if you can run more drive angle, you're going to have more traction. So if you put more traction in the left rear, you're going to be free into the corner and you're going to be tighter off the corner. So will zero indexing make you possibly too tight? That's a good possibility of that. But you know, it's a tuning tool. It's something that, you know, you either got to commit to it or not commit to it. And that's kind of where I stand. I don't know what your thoughts are, Bob.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I've had better luck actually with the zero indexing stuff. I think there's more speed there. The biggest thing, and it would take a couple hours to really explain everything in detail, is you just can't, it's not, you know, a lot of this stuff is cool, but it's just not a bolt-on deal. There's usually 3 or 4 other factors that go into play. And, you know, we've run the zero indexing thing all year on Jake McBurney's car. And you know, the other day in that one feature, he came from almost dead last to ended up running 6th. And so we've had good traction. But boy, the answer is it can be tight in the middle of the corner. There's no doubt about that. You just have to work on that to get the car freed up a little bit more. You know, I think the biggest thing that we went with was with that zero indexing. It seems to like a lot lighter left rear spring. that seemed to work real well, help the car get in. But then, of course, we found that there's some different shock changes, different than what the non-zero indexing. Like if you just, like I said, if you don't change the valving of the shock, that can affect it, because the timing of the zero indexing is just enough different that you got to create all those variables and fix that stuff. So it's I think it has more traction. It definitely will start out being tight, so you're going to want to definitely free it up. But in my opinion, it's by far the way to go. I think the problem with people that go away from it is they don't give it time. They expect magic in one night, and that's, in today's world, that's just not really the case anymore. I wish that was the case, but you got to commit to it. And if you're a guy that's racing one night a week, you might not have the nights to go with the standard indexing stuff is still good. It's very consistent. But when you get to some of these big specials and things like that, I think the zero indexing stuff definitely has an edge. Lily, can't wait to win our first race out here in California, Sport Mod at Ocean Speedway. Well, Lily, I hope that you get to do that. You'll have to keep us informed. That's going to be a nice event when you get that done. So keep us tuned on how you're doing with that. With an IMCA A mod, the weight rule is 2450. Why do you see cars go across the scale at 2,700 to 2,800 pounds? What's the purpose of this?
Grip.
It's definitely grip. I'm still not convinced that that's not a way of crutching the car. You still, it's kind of one of those deals where a lighter weight car will go through the corner faster, but the heavier weight car is going to give you a little bit more grip with the tires that we're running. And so you have to kind of look at the fact that, which is better for your driver. The lighter weight car is you're going to have to be a little more finesse, but I still think it's quicker. I would find it hard to believe, like yesterday's top three A mods were more than 50 pounds overweight. I find it hard to believe that they were running super heavy. Those three cars run a lot of races and they do very well. What would be a good ratio for a 1/3 mile medium bank track? Well, Dan, I think you got a great question. I think I need a little more information about what would be a good ratio, because I'm not sure what you're talking about there. So if you could give us a little more information at the beginning of that question. Can you explain how the zero indexing makes speed? Well, in my opinion, it makes speed because you don't have the fact of camming it over. You can actually run a little bit more bar angle, so it's a little more responsive. It actually, by running more bar angle, you can actually put more steer in the car, so the car will roll through the corner. In my opinion, the car with the zero indexing, with everything set up correctly, will gain more speed through the corner. It rolls through the corner better because you can increase the bar angle without having to worry about the car camming over. What's your opinion, Chad?
I think that's spot on.
I share this stream for my Saskatchewan, North Dakota, mainly racer friends. Well, Robert, that's great. I'm glad you're doing that. That's very kind of you to be helping all those guys out there up in the North Dakota area and to the north of you. That's pretty cool. Dale, it feels like my left rear tire, or my left rear tries to drive my right front forward to the wall in my IMCA modified. The car is down on the right front and has done it with a 350 up to a 550 pound spring. You need to put some lead or some trail in that car. You're just hooking the left rear up too much, so either increase your stagger, increase your bar angle on your right rear so that the right rear has a little bit more grip coming up off the corner. That would be my That's probably what I would suggest, because if it's the same thing, no matter what spring you've got in the right front, then it's a trail issue, a steer issue, or the left rear is just biting so hard, and then in that case we just need to increase the bite to the right rear, make the right rear tire start doing more. Bob, can you explain the benefits of the new spring pull bar versus the biscuit bar? Well, the biggest benefit that I can see about that is there's 3 stages of timing in it. And I'm not saying that the biscuit bar doesn't do the same thing. I'm quite sure it's just like everything. If we worked with it more, it could be. But with that new style bar, it just has more adjustment to it. And some of the adjustments are probably a little bit easier, but not in any way taking away from the other bar. But that's where I see the benefit to it. Does it have more traction? I don't believe it has more traction, but I think it is more adjustable so that you can change the timing of when the traction comes in. That's what I like about it. Dan's talking about a gear ratio. Well, Dan, I really couldn't. And it's another one of those deals where the gear ratio is going to depend on the weight of the car, the size of the engine. I really wished I could answer that one, but that one, you probably would be almost better to talk to some of the guys that you're racing with and get some of those opinions, because whatever I would tell you, I don't know if it would be right. Say if it was an IMCA sport mod and like at Boone, I think the IMCA sport mod guys run like a 583, 567. I think the open motor guys are maybe a 540, 543 to a 555 in that neighborhood, from what I can tell. I don't get involved in a lot of the gear ratio stuff because, in my opinion, the motor's just supposed to run, the gears are supposed to just work, and I can help you with suspension and shocks. 350-pound driver, USRA B mod, having a hard time keeping the car in the right front with a 450 spring and a 320 tie down. Well, Luke, it kind of depends on that 320 tie down. A lot of times these numbers are just numbers. The big key in today's world is 0 point, and that's another long conversation, but 0 point is actually the resistance of the shock in the old hand dyno mode. It's how much force it takes to even move that shock apart. So you could have a 320 number shock with 0 point, and it's not going to keep the car on the right front on the initial motion. So we can build a 3.8 with a lot of 0 point that actually does better than the number. So it's hard for me, without seeing the graph and everything of your shock, it would be hard for me to tell you. But I would talk to your shock builder, and like I said, increasing the 0 point would definitely be my first step. Now, when you do that, you can lose a little bit of traction. So you got to kind of hope that you pick up speed in the middle of the corner to kind of counteract the loss of traction that you might get. Fred Ryland says hello. Hi, Fred. How's everything going out there? I haven't talked to you for quite some time. Chad and I were just talking about some of our California buddies, because we did get to see quite a few people from California this weekend, and that was pretty cool. It's about the only time we get to see those guys, unless you go to Las Vegas, and with the whole COVID situation, I'm a little on the fence about going to Vegas this year. I'm not sure what to think about that deal. The tracks that I race at get pretty rough. I struggle with the car feeling very rigid through the holes. What is some advice that you have done on for rough racetracks? This is for an IMCA modified. rough racetracks can be a struggle. If your car is pretty rigid, this is another deal where, I'd probably talk a little bit with your shock builder, because if the car is pretty rough, I know some of our customers that we run, a fairly heavy rebound on the right rear. And that's kind of almost related to a right rear chain. I told a lot of our customers this weekend, if they're going to try running the top, it was pretty spongy up there, and the car would get pretty radical, and with a lot of rebound in that right rear, which gets you traction off on a smooth racetrack. On a rough racetrack, it can be a handful. So the traction that it gets you can actually end up hurting you. So you got to be a little careful with that. Make sure that the car, go through your suspension, make sure there's absolutely nothing binding anywhere. Make sure everything is well lubed. What's your thoughts, Chad?
You pretty much hit her on the head there. If there's any, I don't know if it's a chain issue or your chains are too tight. Maybe it's, chains can be bad and rough. So I don't know what you got for chains, but.
Yeah, no doubt. I just, and trust me, on a rough racetrack, you're much better off to run a car that's a little on the free side than a car that's on the tight side. Because when it gets on the tight side and that right rear lands in a hole, that right rear is going to want to hook, and it's going to want to try to get the right front to go to the right instead of the left. And that can make you catch your breath a couple times. I've seen that this weekend a few times, to be honest. Or I shouldn't say weekend, this week. Yeah, there's a couple guys. I bet they thought, oh my Lord. Because, there's a couple of them came off the corner, they hooked the right rear, and that thing was head on into the fence in the snap of a finger. I'm like, whoa. But what lengthening the chain, the left rear chain on IMCA modified, but moving the bars down on the chassis, do they have the same dynamic angle? And resetting the preload on the left rear, how will that affect handling of the car? Go ahead, Jed.
Well, did you reset the steer is the question. That's the whole thing about steering. Did you say lengthening the chain, but you didn't say lengthening the wheelbase? So when you let chain out, the biggest thing that I see, and I'm sure you're going to agree, is especially when you're playing with the zero index deal, is now we can let more chain out because the cage ain't bound up, and we can put more drive angle in it, but then you oversteer. So when you let the chain out, the more you let the chain out, the more that rear end travels, and especially when the chain gets long, it travels a lot. So, and when the bar angles get extreme, it travels drastically. So the steer is one thing that I would look to stop in the same spot all the time.
Yeah, and that is such a key thing, because you got to remember, and I've talked about this. I talk about this in the schools all the time. Know when you make a change, know what else you need to change to counteract that change. Because say, for example, just like Chad said, if we go ahead and we lengthen the left rear chain, well, then now all of a sudden, instead of getting 3 inches of steer, we get 3.5 inches of steer. Well, now all of a sudden, whatever we did there, it compounded. You dropped the left lower trailing arm so that you would gain a little bit of traction by spreading those apart, but then you also changed the amount of steer. Now, if you needed to do that to get the steer, then I would think that would be a good idea. But just remember, there's always an opposite and equal reaction to whatever you do. So you got to think through the whole situation. And that's kind of where, I talk about when you start to analyze your car, spend a lot of time on phase one. Corner entry is so key, because everything you got to start. You can't go backwards. You can't start at corner exit and start tightening the car up. You've got to start at the beginning of the corner, adjust the car so that it rolls to the middle, then you work on the middle, and then you work on the exit. Because most of the time, if you fix all the issues in phase one and phase two, exit's usually never a problem. And so just keep that in mind. Jake, with an IMCA modified, any advantages to running the pull bar location in front of the center line of the housing? Well, in my opinion, that seems to be the trend. There's some cars, some of the open cars don't do that as much, but some of the like the IMCA type cars or the cars with limited spoiler and things like that, I think do. Our cars, we run 3 inches ahead of center, and that's all based back when we used to do that. It's all based on the amount of movement that you get on the pull bar. Well, in today's pull bar world, you don't get. I mean, if you're really much over 1.5 inches of movement, you're too much. And 1.25 inches seems to be kind of where we like to see the happy point of that. I just, with it being behind center, if it rolls backward, it's going to take angle out. And usually when you take angle out, sometimes that can cost you traction off the corner. So I always want to keep it working. As the pull bar compresses, I like to see things working to angle, increasing angle to get traction off with our limited stuff. Hey, Sean, how are you doing today? Brandon, hope Bob and Chad, hope you guys are doing well. I don't know about Chad. I can't actually say so much on how well he's doing, so I'm going to have to let him comment on that. My butt was dragging today. Holy cow. And
I'm tired.
In a situation where, my highly qualified shock builder who busted his butt all freaking week building shocks and repairing shocks and doing all that stuff. And me being chief officer of the situation, I observed most of this. And then when I kind of complained about being tired, it was brought to my attention about I maybe didn't invest as much physical labor. And I don't think it really mattered. When you're sitting in the rain for 4 days, it just plain wears you out if you don't do anything.
Yeah, it's mentally exhausting thinking.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this morning, I mean, when the alarm clock went off, I'm like, oh my God, no. So I thought about it for a while, and I kind of leaned over and I started petting the dog, and needless to say, and I woke up a couple hours later, and so I didn't compound the lack of work that I put in last week. I even was late to work today.
One of my guys was late.
Golly gee. But anyway, you know what? You guys are talking, Brian wants to talk about that new pull bar that we have. And like I said, it's not necessarily ours, but we've got some pieces. It's a spring bar compared to a biscuit bar. I mean, it's kind of got all the elements in it, and it's just very adjustable. Bobby's really the one that has worked with that bar the most and can actually explain it to you more because he's worked with the guy that builds that. I wished I could give you a sales pitch, but I don't know as much about it as I probably should. And I am going to have to spend a little time visiting with him about that because I had a couple calls on it today, and we've had good luck with it. There's some things that need to be changed with that bar, I think, still, but so far it's worked out pretty good. But once again, it's back to that magic of a pull bar. I mean, there's a lot of great pull bars out there. You just got to get the one that works best for you and the one that's simple and that has some longevity to it so you don't have to work on the thing. Greg wants to know, Chad, if you could give a quickie lesson in what zero indexing is.
Greg must have just tuned in.
Greg, where have you been the last 20 shows?
You have to go back and rewatch the beginning of this. We just went over it twice. But zero index just takes the bind out of left rear suspension. So when you're at full droop and the suspension cage is at the verge of tipping over and being in bar lock, it takes the bind out of left rear suspension. Essentially then allows you to run more drive angle, or aka more chain, and essentially gets you traction. So puts the blade in the air, puts the drive angle up there, but you got to watch the steer. So it's a tuning device. It's not going to help you kiss the trophy queen instantly. It definitely needs to be worked on. So not magic, but it's definitely an advantage in my book and Bob's book. So
like I said, it's I tell people that, it's just a situation. You really need to understand how it works. Um, and that's one of the things that we spend a good hour in some of our schools. I think that's something that, I would strongly recommend for those guys that are a little bit more confused about it. With our simulator and stuff that we use in the schools, it's pretty easy to understand. Andrew says he moved to a modified a year ago from several years in the sport mod. From your videos, I've tried a different setup and the car's working much better. What's the reason for running 2-inch offsets on the left front, right front, and left rear? I currently run 3s all the way around. Well, the big advantage to running the 2-inch wheels, number one, you get a wider base. So in other words, when you put a pair of 2-inch wheels on the front, your front end just got 2 inches wider. Well, when you move that tire, as you move it a little bit further away from the spring, it acts like you put softer springs in the front because your wheel rate is going to be a little bit less. But the thing that you gain is much more stability. The 2-inch offset. Now, what we do on the cars that we sell, I recommend putting 1-inch spacers on there. I'm kind of an old school guy that's not really a big fan of having to change a tire at the racetrack off of a 3-inch wheel to put it on a 2-inch wheel. So we put a 2-inch or a 1-inch spacer on both front so that we take our 3s, and that makes the car wider. The other thing that the left rear, once again, if you do it to the front, you're going to want to do it to the left rear, because what you're going to want to do, I always recommend string lining my left side tires. It doesn't matter if it's a sport mod, hobby stock, whatever it is. On a dirt car, I think those two tires need to track totally in line, because then the car is just more adjustable, and it just gives me a little more better way of knowing where everything's at, so I can make my adjustments accordingly. But if you tried the spacers or tried the 2-inch wheels, you definitely will find out that it's. I like it. I think it makes it a little bit more stable. I have asked and seen others ask with no true answer. If your car is on a baseline setup and you are going out on a dry slick change, what changes do I make? What's your go-to in this situation for an A mod? Well, from my base setup, on a dry slick racetrack, 9 times out of 10, I will soften my right front shock, because on a dry slick racetrack, I tend to soften left side compressions, because now when your racetrack is dry slick, so you're going a second slower probably than you were before. So by that, we still get the car to roll over at the time that we want it, because we're just changing the timing on the right side shocks. If the racetrack's a racetrack where you got to roll around the bottom, I still keep the stagger in it. What I'll probably do is I'll put 1/8 of an inch of lead in the car, so that the car likes to come off a little better with the stagger. One of the biggest things, I seen this last week at Boone, that people at the racetrack would start to go dry, and the biggest thing they do is they take stagger out, they tighten their car up more, they put more angle in the panhard bar, and they couldn't turn that thing into 40-acre field.
Over tight.
Yeah, and I personally tell people I very seldom tighten the car up much. I don't very seldom ever change stagger. I put lead in the car and soften up my right side shocks. Is pretty much my go-to. I don't make a lot of changes from heat to feature on that situation.
You hit the nail on the head with the pace. When the pace slows down, the car ain't going to travel. It ain't going to get the attitude. It ain't going to rotate. So
exactly,
you almost have to free up to get the car to turn. And then once you can turn, you're going to have traction. We did it for years. Tighten the car, it's slick, tighten the car. Well, when you have more wheel input, because it's so tight, and then you're tight when you pick up the fuel, then what do? Shear traction.
Yep.
So that's a
problem. Very easy. And like I said, one of the bigger mistakes I see, people will put more panic bar in it. Well, the worst thing you can do is tighten up the right rear more. That is your feeling as a driver. You're going to want the feel of that right rear. But in reality, you just want the feel of the car just needs to go down in there, roll on its own so you can easy get back on the power and keep the car straight up off the corner. It'll be much better. Good evening, guys. Once again, thanks for your time and the information. Well, we appreciate that, Shannon, from Yuma, Arizona. I tell you what, Yuma, Arizona is probably one of my favorite racetracks. I miss the fact that when they changed some of that Arizona tour, that there was a couple times they left that out. And that racetrack is probably one of my favorite places to go. It's a neat place. You're lucky to have such a nice place. Then, of course, they got the casino right next door and all kinds of other things to go with it. And it is just a great time. Every time I've been down there, I've had a great time. Randy Harrison, our old buddy Randy, wants to know, how do I dry all my stuff out after boom? Well, I'll tell you what we did. Pretty much everybody was on wash down mode today. Washing everything up, and so we've got stuff kind of strung all over the shop drying. We had stuff out in the sun drying, and so I tried the sun. That works pretty good.
Mason was cleaning the golf cart for at least an hour and a half, 2 hours. He's like, I can't get all the mud off, Dad. I'm like, well, it's been on there for 7 days. You're gonna have to get it wet and then let it soak in.
Oh my gosh!
Worked on the golf cart a lot.
I mean, my golf cart, there's mud stuck up underneath there. And I did find that for all you golf cart friends, a standard OEM golf cart tire does not work worth a crap in the mud. It has zero traction.
Yeah.
Boy, I was going through one big slug of mud and the golf cart almost stalled out. And I'm like, oh my God. And that's going to be great. Everybody's going to laugh that Bob got his golf cart stuck in mud. And luckily it caught. I kind of wiggled a little bit and it caught and I made it. I didn't try it again though. No way. I found myself getting in trouble with the load stick and the spring smasher by adjusting one corner of the car and not keeping the balance in the car. I'm sure this has happened to other people. Can you share any advice for keeping the car balanced when using the new school setup equipment? Hi, Rhonda. Oh, Rhonda, I forgot about talking to Chad about your computer situation. I'll do that later. Never mind. I'll let you answer that question, Chad.
I'm not sure what the problem is.
He says
sure what the problem is. I mean, where are you getting lost is the question. Or, I don't know how you're using the two together, but you're setting the loads and using the load stick and the smash machine to adjust your loads. So I guess I'm not sure how you're getting messed up. We might need a little more information on what your problems are there, but I mean, the load stick is basically just helps you change springs and gets you a number to run a baseline off of, and that's basically the same thing the smasher does for the rear coilovers. So not sure where you're having issues there, but we can elaborate more if we get some more.
Well, and I think, sometimes people, we get this, and I've had this a lot. Some chassis builders, tell you that you need to use the scales and stuff again, which I'm not saying that isn't true if you have all the facts. Where I think people get into trouble is when they abort the scales. They've been used to using scales for so many years, and that's kind of what I do. I still use scales. I get my car balanced. Okay, I get it balanced, everything it wants to do. Then I forget about what the left rear spring is actually going to do. I still just take it, put it in the load, smash the load, make sure I got my load number that I want back there. And the thing that people on the front end, sometimes I think they get a little confused that the load stick, once again, it just gives you a number so that you can see what your load is on that right front tire. that just gives you a reference so that you can kind of go back to it. If I change from a 450 to a 500 or a 500 to a 450, I had a couple people swap springs this weekend, from the front to from the left front to the right front. Just because of the way the racetrack was, we needed to put the softer spring in the left front to let the car kind of get over and unhook the right rear. Anyway, what happens is, I think people think that you got to have a certain load number, so they just crank on that thing. Well, then all of a sudden it raises their ride heights and all that, which it's going to raise it some. But I think that that's where they get confused, is they just start using it. Well, I use it as a rule of thumb. Say my load number is 1350. I mean, I'm not saying that's the number you need, but we're just going to throw out a number to be exact for purposes. Then if the car is doing something and it works pretty good, but I feel like my right front spring is maybe just a little soft, rather than changing the spring, I'll actually put a couple loads in that right front. Now, the thing that sometimes people forget to talk about is the fact that the right front shock needs to be set at your ride height number. So your shock builder needs to have this shock to the point where you almost have to slightly push down on the front bumper to hook this shock up so that you can preload your spring against the shock. Well, when you do that, and what you're learning there is, now if I have to get the car, and say if I have to go to 4 turns to get the car where I want it, that's telling me that maybe I should consider going to a stiffer spring, because once again, if we've got, say, a 450, it's still going to be a 450, but my preload's going to get a little bit more, and my load stick number is going to get more when I'm preloading it against the shock. So that's one of the things that people kind of get confused in, and that's another thing that, that's one thing that we spend quite a bit of time on in the schools, and it sounds difficult, but it really, once you do it, of course, what might seem easy to me, because I do it a few times, it might not be easy to you guys, but once again, that's one of the things. Shauna's got a question. She wants to know, what is the best way to check rear bar angle on a sport mod? Well, when the car's sitting there at ride height in a standard motion, just take an angle gauge. We've got those digital angle finders, and they're magnetic, so you can set it right in on the bar and see what the angle is. But once again, like I've said in other episodes, it's more important, in my opinion, on the left rear to check the bar angle when the car's more in the dynamic load. So what we do is, set the chain wherever the chassis builder tells you to do it, or set the chain. I jack the car up underneath the seat, and then I check my bar angle at that point. And that bar angle, we still like to run it in that, 42, 45 degrees. Now keep in mind, without compressing the right front, and that's one advantage. If you had the load stick, you could compress the right front and you could get the true dynamic angle. But say if you don't have that, you can still jack up underneath the seat, and if you set that at 42 degrees, you have to remember that more than likely when you get the right front rolled over and down, it's actually going to be about 44 to 45. I would never go past the 45 degree mark, because it seems to me like the car starts to get that povo stick motion and gets a little bit finicky, to the point where you'll get drive, but then you'll start to lose drive because it's trying to push up rather than push forward and lift. Well, guys, we only got 10 minutes to go, so I'm going to have to kind of get going here. Just wanted to let Chad know I have a new favorite hat. Also listened to episode 19 on the way this morning. Thanks for the shout out. Halfway home to Arizona. Been waiting all day for this episode. Well, Chris, I appreciate that. I know Chad appreciates that. And sorry, you're only halfway home to Arizona. So you at least have had all kinds of time then if you're driving back to Arizona.
Yeah, it was good to see you, Chris.
IMCA modified on tractioned up racetrack. Is it possible to have too much traction and make the engine labor really hard by having too much J-bar or right rear load? Most definitely, Brenton. I see this 95% of the time because what's happening is you're lugging the engine's going to overheat, it's going to lose a little bit of power. But when the engine lugs, you lose so much speed. And you have to have as much speed as you can through the middle of the corner. It's much better to run the car free and have the motor running free because you might not have the traction off the corner that you want, but you will pick up so much speed in the center of the corner that you'll think you have all kinds of traction off the corner. If you're going fast in the middle of the corner, I never hear anybody complain about the fact that they need more traction off the corner. And so it's hard to get people to understand that running your car freer will actually give you more traction off the corner. And it's just because you're not lugging the motor, you're not making anything overwork too hard, the right rear is not stuck or loaded too much, the car just runs free. Chad, what is your go-to fix to get more forward bite on dry slick?
Such a loaded question. I like the right rear, steer the right rear head or the right bottom rod up on the cage or down on the chassis is kind of like one of my favorites. But, again, when you talk about forward bite, there's a lot of different timing issues there. If you're talking about instant traction, longevity traction, just overall traction, 9 times out of 10, you're probably too tight into the corner and into the middle. But my go-to, if I'm rolling in good, turning through the middle nice, I like to play with the wheelbase on the right rear or the right bottom rod.
So I would completely agree with that. One of the things in that situation, we had a customer from Nevada that was out there racing this weekend. And with the track conditions, the racetrack was a little bit greasier. And then certain times where it'd have a little bit more bite. And normally I like to run that bar up on the cage, but in his situation, the car was a little bit too tight on him getting in. And I probably, and I didn't really mean to, but I know Jeff Taylor used to tell me all the time that he said, you're just a little too straightforward on this stuff. You need to fluff it up a little bit so you don't hurt her feelings. Because I basically told this guy, I said, man, you got to drive this thing. I mean, you just can't be driving it like you're going to the grocery store. It's going to be tight if you're going to drive it like you're going to the grocery store. The advantage of having that bar up, you can actually run the car in, be a little bit more sideways, and the way the angle works, it can keep the bite in the car and still be, have the car yawed out just a little bit. So it really works very well. Okay, guys, we've got time for a couple more questions. If anybody's got some more questions, I don't know if there was anything that I didn't talk about or missed.
How about the big news?
What?
How about the big news of the day?
Oh, yeah, the big news of the day. They canceled the PRI show.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, that goes to show that when you get an event like that gets canceled, it's definitely but that's in the best interest of everybody. I mean, this whole deal, I was kind of scared a little bit over the weekend, even though I know we were outside and stuff like that. But I'm diabetic, so there's certain things you got to have a little bit concerned with. But for the most part, like I said, I think everybody's doing a good job. Wash your hands, keep your hands washed, and but that's a good. I mean that deal has so many people that are side to side, and if they were going to restrict it, that was going to be a bad situation for the vendors, and they got to look at what's in the best interest of everybody, and I think that was a very wise choice.
Yeah, it's been a miserable 3 months trying to figure out what to and what not to do. But I'm glad they made the decision. I pulled out this morning and then they canceled this afternoon. So
Oh, so you're really the cause of this whole deal then?
yeah, well, there's probably hundreds of companies that pulled out today because tomorrow was the deadline to get your money back. So
Oh, got it.
we all kind of made our decision today, probably.
Yeah. Oh, I can understand. Um, with a really slimy, slippery, wet track, what would you set the car up the same as dry slick? Actually, Joe, I would do the same, pretty much the same thing as I would do on a dry slick racetrack. I would definitely soften my right side shocks. That would be my very first thing. We have went down when the racetrack is slimy, like say at Boone is a prime example. We've even went down to 2 compression right side shocks because you have no abrasion for the racetrack. Even when the racetrack is dry slick, there's abrasion. But when it's greasy slick, it's kind of like trying to get side bite on ice. I mean, it's very, very difficult to do. So you just got to force the car to get over naturally on the right side and get as much side grip as you can so that you can go forward. Going back to Brent's question, when you're hooking the car up too much and lugging the motor, is it best to fix taking angle out of the J-bar or the Panhard bar? What's your suggestion? Well, in my opinion, I still think that if you're talking with an A-mod, I still think it's better to take angle out of it. I don't run a lot of angle in the J-bar. We run it like on Chad's plates, we run it at 0 and 6 inches of angle. The problem I've found, especially with the crate motors, the J-bar can really tighten that car up on that right rear. And keep in mind, we don't have a tremendous amount of horsepower to waste, and it definitely does. So the J-bar is definitely where I would look. The other thing would be rear steer. You know, I'd make sure that the car's set so my bar angles maybe would have a little bit more steer in it when it's heavy like that, just so that you can get through the corner and drive through the corner a little bit better. In a stock car, and actually we've got one more question by Marcus, and then we're going to have to, I think we've got one more question with Jim, and then we're going to have to call it an evening here, guys. But in a stock car, do you believe running a preloaded left rear 125 is better than a normal set of springs? All my cars did that 3-wheel with the 125. Well, what happens is when you go with a softer spring on the left rear, you actually have to stiffen the right rear spring. And sometimes guys don't do that. And what happens is the car you've got so much load trying to load that left rear, the car gets over and lays on the right side, which it goes to the right rear, and then you get that wheeling motion. So in that perspective, you got to actually go a little stiffer on that right rear spring. You know, if guys running a normal 225, you need to go to a 250, something to that extent. Having trouble getting side bite in the dry. I have a 225 right rear, 150 left rear, 525 right front, 600 8-inch split in the J-bar. Well, it all depends on where the J-bar is located. Split is an issue, but if the J-bar, you know, you might want to consider dropping the whole J-bar down. You know, and it's possible, depending on how much load you have on the left rear, you could possibly try a 225 right rear. If this is on an A-mod, though, sometimes I'm not a real huge fan of that stiff spring. I'd probably consider going softer than that 150. I'd try a 100.
Might be a little both.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Just a thumbs up to Chad and the crew at Wehrs for producing American-built quality stuff. We keep adding more of your stuff and are very impressed with everything so far. Well, we appreciate that. Chad appreciates that. I'll let you comment on that, Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I couldn't be more prouder than anything to be an American manufacturer and employ 32 people and make parts right here in little old Bangor, Wisconsin, and ship them all over the country and the world for that matter. And you know, it just gives me a tremendous amount of pride to be a part of it in the industry and try to keep American jobs in this country.
Rob wants to know any idea of how this pandemic may affect the RTI schools this winter. Well, to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure how they will affect it. We're definitely going to probably do the temperature check thing, and we're going to plead with you that if you're signed up for one of the schools and you get sick, please, please let us know. We're more than happy to give you your money back. But, you know, it's that old adage, you know, the governor of Iowa talks about it all the time. If you're sick, stay home. Don't infect the rest of the people. Chad and I and my daughter and everybody that went to the school out in Pennsylvania have that for say, because there was a couple gentlemen there that were pretty sick, and by the time we got home, we were all sick. And it was just a situation where I know that guy didn't mean any harm, but you got to use common sense. You know, if we wash our hands and we cover our mouths like we're supposed to, and we do all the things, we're going to be fine. And we're going to go with a setup that we've got the schools. The dates are all up on our website, the RTI or racetechinfo.com site. They're all in place, and like I said, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that all works out good. We're hoping that maybe they come up with some things to help our situation before the school time, but we're going with the attitude we're going to have them. We're going to put some things in place. Like I said, for gosh sakes, if you're sick, please don't come. And we might end up having to go to, like with the Sport Mod, usually is our largest school here at our place. We might have to consider going to two schools and splitting them so that, you know, we're not overcrowded and like that. So we're going to do everything we can. Wade Taylor, we appreciate that. Once again, I didn't mean to be so hard on you. I know you did talk about Bobby, or you called, or you texted Bobby and told him you promised that you drive that car much harder. So please don't be offended. Just straight to the point. All right, well, guys, we've had a great night again. We enjoy it. We always have fun, and I mean, I thought it would be nothing better, more fun than to, at least now Chad and I have got to spend 9 days together. So that's been pretty cool.
Yeah, wow. Good times.
Yes, very good time. So thanks again for watching the show, and we appreciate it. And we will see you guys next Monday night.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.